Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the next episode of the Perfectly Imperfect Spiritual Podcast. My name is Marta, and today I want to explore something that I think many people are experiencing very deeply right now, even if they not yet fully have language for it. Human perception feels overwhelmed. That's what I would like to talk about today. And maybe other things will be covered today as well. So I'm not going to speak and talk about the human perception in an emotional way. I want to talk about how we perceive it. I think we are living in environments that continuously overload human awareness while simultaneously fragmenting human attention. And over time, that changes the way people experience themselves, each other, reality, emotion, spirituality, and even their own inner clarity. Because there is now so much competing for our attention that many people no longer know what genuinely deserves their focus, emotional energy, or even their awareness anymore. Notifications, opinions, trauma language, healing language, fear, content, social media, emotional exposure, political tension, spiritual messaging, other people's projections, other people's emotions, other people's nervous systems. Everything is constantly entering awareness. And I think one of the most exhausting aspects of modern life is that the human body was never designed to process this volume of stimulation continuously without consequence. There are moments where I genuinely feel people are no longer tired physically as much as they are tired perceptually, tired from scanning, tired from processing, reacting, tired from anticipating, tired from interpreting, and tired from remaining emotionally reachable all the time. Because awareness itself has become overloaded. And I think this conversation becomes even more layered when somebody is naturally highly sensitive or spiritually perceptive. For me personally, this became profoundly confronting because my experiences with spirit, intuition, and heightened sensitivity didn't happen separately from my nervous system. They happened through it. And I think spiritual conversations sometimes fail to acknowledge this honestly enough. People often speak about awakening, psychic perception, intuition, or spiritual openness as though these experiences happen independently from the body, independently from emotional history, independently from trauma, and independently from psychological reality. But perception doesn't emerge in isolation. The body is involved in all of it. The nervous system is involved in all of it. Our history is involved in all of it. I grew up in a deeply unstable environment shaped by alcoholism, unpredictability, emotional inconsistency, and hypervigilance. And I think environments like that train the nervous system into heightened awareness very early in life. You begin reading atmospheres before language, silence before words, emotional tension before behavior. The body becomes extraordinarily attentive because attentiveness feels necessarily for survival. And I think many highly sensitive people do not realize how much of their perception was shaped long before they ever began describing themselves as intuitive, empathic, spiritually aware, or energetically sensitive. The body learns vigilance first, which is why discernment matters so deeply. Because hypervigilance can imitate intuition so convincingly that people no longer know the difference internally. And in a world that continuously overwhelms awareness, that distinction becomes even harder to recognize clearly. For me, spiritual experiences, they intensified consciously during one of the most emotionally destabilizing periods of my life. And what made those experiences overwhelming initially was not simply the experiences themselves, it was the volume, the intensity, the sensory information, the emotional saturation, the feeling that my perception had become too open. There were periods where everything started feeling emotionally loud. People felt loud, spaces felt loud, social media felt loud, grief felt loud, spirit felt loud, the world itself felt loud. And at some point, I realized I was no longer only perceiving life, I was absorbing it. That distinction changed everything for me because there's an enormous difference between awareness and absorption. Awareness allows observation, absorption consumes the nervous system. And I think many people are unknowingly living in states of continuous absorption now, emotionally, psychologically, digitally, and of course, energetically. People wake up and immediately begin consuming information, emotions, opinions, stimulation, fear, identities, projections, and anxiety before they have even fully connected to themselves internally. Modern life rewards hyperattention while quietly destroying discernment, and overstimulation slowly fragments perception because eventually everything begins feeling emotionally charged. Everything feels important, everything feels urgent, everything feels meaningful, everything feels deserving of awareness. The nervous system stops knowing what genuinely requires attention anymore. And this is one of the reasons so many people feel chronically overwhelmed now. Not because they are weak, not because they are incapable, not because they are spiritually failing, but because human awareness itself is carrying too much input continuously. And I noticed this in my own life very strongly over the last few years. And there came a point where I realized I didn't want to remain constantly accessible to stimulation anymore. I deleted my Facebook account entirely because I realized it had become another space unconsciously pulling my attention outward over and over again. Another app, another stream of information, another habit of checking, scanning, observing. And I started protecting my attention, protecting my peace much more carefully after that. Protecting silence, protecting offline time, protecting space away from endless emotional and informational intrusion. Because attention is not neutral. What repeatedly enters awareness shapes the nervous system over time. It shapes emotional capacity, it shapes clarity, shapes regulation, shapes inner stability, shapes perception itself. And I think Many people are living so externally now that they no longer hear themselves clearly underneath the noise. Silence became deeply important for me because silence interrupts overstimulation. Not performative silence, not aesthetic spirituality, real silence. The kind where external stimulation quietens enough for the body to finally communicate honestly. And sometimes what emerges in that silence is uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, exhaustion, grief, emotional saturation, loneliness, confusion, the realization that perception itself has become overloaded. And I think this is why embodiment became such an important part of my life too, because there is a profound difference between being connected to the body and overriding the body. Many people continue functioning while remaining completely disconnected from what their nervous systems are communicating underneath everything else. They push through exhaustion, push through emotional overwhelm, push through fragmentation, push through overstimulation, push through depletion. And eventually, the body starts carrying emotional weight the mind can no longer process coherently. The body remembers what the mind tries to outrun. And perhaps this is why movement became so important for me too. Not movement as punishment, not movement as performance, not movement as productivity, but movement as reconnection, as release, as regulation, and as returning to myself physically after spending too much time trapped inside perception. Because there are experiences language alone cannot fully metabolize. Some things need to move through the body. I no longer believe awakening is about escaping humanity. If anything, I think awakening intensifies our relationship with humanity, with emotion, with responsibility, with discernment, with the nervous system, with the body, with boundaries, and with reality itself. And maybe the real work now is not becoming endlessly open. Maybe the real work is learning how to remain internally clear in a world that continuously competes for our awareness and fragments our attention. Because I think discernment is becoming a form of protection now. Protecting attention, protecting the nervous system, protecting inner clarity, protecting the ability to hear ourselves beneath the noise. And perhaps real spirituality is not about becoming more fragmented by the world. Perhaps it is about learning how to remain deeply present within it without losing ourselves entirely. Thank you for being here with me today, and I'll speak to you again very soon in the next episode. Bye for now.